Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. We are continuing, well actually we're nearly rounding off the book of Hoshea, and we are on chapter 13 today, guiding us through this book, as he has for all the other chapters of this book, Rabbi Joshua Neely. Thank you very much for joining us again today, Rabbi Neely.
Well, thank you, Jason.
We're going to jump straight in. If you haven't seen or heard any of the previous chapters, there'll be a little question mark on your screen at the moment. You can click that, it'll take you straight to the playlist. If you've got requests for books that you'd like us to cover when we've finished this one and the next one, which is only a week long, then let us know, and after we've gone through Jonah, we'll put the top voted one next. Pleasing the people. Okay, so we are in Hosea chapter 13, and it starts like this. When Ephraim spoke with trembling, he became exalted in Israel. When he became guilty through Baal, he died. I am going to assume straight away that trembling, which I recognize as a term, is the same kind of description of when a person comes to God, and he comes to God in trembling, in awe.
Yes, that's a fair analysis.
And then the juxtaposition of that is when that doesn't happen anymore, and he goes to the foreign gods, because it's not talking about a literal death here, and it's cut Ephraim off completely. It feels like there's more kind of a polar thing going on, where you either like a binary, you either a 1 or a 0, and when Ephraim was in trembling, he was a nice big 1, and when he went to Baal, he was a big fat 0.
Definitely that. It's also sort of the idea of contracting a terminal disease, might be another way of putting it. You know, as soon as he went to Baal, no longer was he exalted, which is a raising up. Instead, he was terminal, which meant he was going to be lowered into the grave. So there's a vertical contrast happening there as well.
Some people will read the text and they have a very literal view of it, and their argument will be, well, Ephraim died, it says there. But I try to remember Ezekiel 18 all the time, because Ezekiel 18 has the up and down roller coaster journey of a human soul, and how it can do terrible, terrible things, but then repent, and those terrible, terrible things are lifted, and you can make the choice to go on and be a better person, in which case everything's better until you're as good as your last decision. That's what it feels like. It's like,
well, and you know, if literalism is getting in the way, I would remind a reader to say, why is Hosea talking to them if they're already dead? Right? Is he speaking to their graves? No, he's speaking to the living people, hoping that they will return.
Yeah, we often talk about the prophets kind of getting the trains back onto the track, but if it's already a train wreck, what's the point?
Right.
You make a good point. Verse 2. And now they continue to sin, and they have made for themselves a molten image from their silver, according to their pattern, deities, all of it the work of craftsmen. To them they say, those who sacrifice man may kiss the calves. And there's kind of a golden calf thing going on here, or a silver calf, and we've touched on that before in this book as we've gone through. Those who sacrifice man may kiss the calves. Can you unpack that?
I can do my best, at least according to the some of the commentaries that have been out there. The idea here being that people would, first of all, literally sacrifice people, that they were talking about human sacrifice here, and equating that with the worship of the cow that was set up in the north, the golden calf, part 2, that was set up in the north as a contrast to having the Israelites go down to Judah for Jerusalem. There are others who say, though, that sacrificing man and kissing the calves is more symbolic and less literal of human sacrifice, but was more of dedicating and their children and their future towards the pagan deities, which is, of course, the equivalent of killing them. You are giving up your future for this purpose.
Therefore, they shall be like a morning cloud, and like dew that passes away early, like chaff that is driven with the wind out of the threshing floor, and like smoke out of a chimney. I imagine that if you were brought up in a city and you're relatively young, most of what we've just spoken about means nothing to you. But if you live in the countryside or a little bit older, then you're fully familiar of morning clouds or of dew or what a chimney might look like.
Well, I think even in these days, urban dwellers would still recognize what it meant to have smoke that disappeared so quickly. And if you've ever actually allowed yourself to sit and wonder, wait, I saw the smoke coming up out of the hole and now it's gone, but it only took like a couple feet. Where did it go? And how did it happen so quickly? That's the kind of feeling that Hosea is seeking to evoke in the reader or in the listener.
I am the Lord your God from the land of Egypt, and the gods. Did I say that right? Yeah, I did. Okay.
Yes. So I mean, it's a bit of an awkward phrasing in English, which is basically you would probably assume that there was a phrase like ever since the land of Egypt, or from the time of the land of Egypt. That seems to be the implication. Before you continue, however, I do want to point out that when you get the emphasizing Anochi as the opening line, it's really trying to drive home it's me, guys, right? I am the one who is your God, right? And it's that emphasis doesn't always come through so clearly in the English.
So we need some bold font on that and there.
It would help, yeah.
Right.
Or sometimes you could do like a double up, like, I am the Lord your God.
Very good. Okay. And I am the Lord your God. There you go. From the land of Egypt. And gods besides me you should not know. And there is no savior but me. It's a great line. I use that a lot. I think that speaks for itself. It's recalling to them their birth, right, and how the people were saved from bondage and all the amazing things that God did. And
I also want to point out this usage of the word "no," because sometimes that can be very confusing in English. I mean, does that mean that my brain shouldn't even have the word for some of these other gods? And that's not really what the usage is trying to indicate here. It's trying to indicate that you should not be intimately familiar with them, that you should not be trying to seek to understand and connect with them. That's what knowing means in this kind of context.
So it's literally when they say he knew her in a biblical sense.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. I knew you in the desert, in a land of deprivation. This, again, is this a direct reference to the 40 years in the wilderness?
Couldn't be anything but. Exactly right.
When they grazed and were sated, they were sated and their heart became haughty. Therefore, they forgot me. Is there an explicit reference to this as well? Because I know that, they complained they didn't get the manna, they got the manna. They complained they didn't get the meat, and then they got the quail.
Right. Well, no, this is really more of the second half where they were brought into the land of Israel. And indeed, this is exactly what God and Moses forewarned, that when the people of Israel would settle in the land of Israel, they would become very prosperous and they would do very well. And certainly the northern tribes were considered to be the most materially prosperous. And the Torah warned that they would get fat and they would forget God. And they would say, my hands did all of this for myself, and I'm a self-made man and all that kind of nonsense. And once you get down that line, it's very easy to turn your heart away from God because, hey, I can do everything for myself.
And I was to them as a lion, as a leopard, by the way I will lurk. I will meet them as is it a bereaving bear?
Kind of. Right, so this is often used as meaning a bereaved bear or a mother bear whose young has been taken. But that's sort of the usual expression that's used. Right. But it's not just a random bear walking through the woods. This is an antagonized and enraged and forlorn, which is not a good thing in a bear. And
I will rend the enclosure of their heart. And I will devour them as a lion. The beast of the field shall rend them asunder. That's good stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, it is. When it says the beast of the field shall rend them asunder, we're still talking about an analogy of how they're going to be treated by the Creator. Only it seems like suddenly that's a separate thing. Like they won't be safe from passing animals.
So there's a number of mixed metaphors happening in these verses. One of them is the idea of a lurking beast that the people, because of their rebellion, are walking towards the ambush, if you will. But it's if they were just walking a different way, they would never be there. It's like, it's not as though the lion hunted them down; they walked into the lion, and the ripping open of the casing of the heart is not just a metaphor of aggression, but also a metaphor of redemption. The idea being that there's a hard shell that we've grown around our hearts and our arrogance and our complacency, and that is going to be ripped open. Not exactly a pleasant experience, however, if you've made it that hard to have it be exposed in order to let your heart and self really be open once again. And then we get the more, what is this actually going to look like ending, which is not that God himself is going to have heavenly hands come down and tear open our chests. It's not that God himself is going to have fangs and do anything. It's the world around us is going to become hostile and aggressive. And that is going to drive us in a direction away from what we've been doing.
Okay, very good. Right. So it's really kind of highlighting how violent it's going to be.
And unnecessarily so, meaning that it's our choice.
Verse 9. You have destroyed yourself, O Israel, for, and then in brackets they've got you have rebelled against me, against your help. I get that your help is also me, and doubling up there. Is there anything you want to add for that line, or should I just skip on?
Nope, I think you covered it nicely. You put in the ellipse as it needed to be.
Now, this one's a little bit difficult to read. I'm not sure if you've got the same as me. I will be, where is your king? Now let him save you in all your cities and your judges, concerning whom you said, give me a king and princes. I read it and I read it and I read it, and I thought maybe I'm missing something. But is this like, so when Moses stands before the burning bush and it says, I will be who I will be, is this the same kind of I will be?
Not exactly. It's a different construct in the Hebrew, but it is related to the same root. So what's kind of being said here, well, it could be said in a couple of different ways. One of them is a very straightforward, as you were reading it, which is like, so I'll be all like, so where's your king? Which is an unusual Hebrew expression, but not impossible. And definitely the commentators read it more as being, and then I will say, where is your king? As a retort. So again, there's almost like an implied word in the poetry that for the poetry wasn't necessary, but if we want to render it into prose, which is basically what we're doing, then it kind of needs a little more linkage. But again, the rest of this is very much sort of God's indignation that the people asked for kings and princes and all of that, and they are not helping them at all. They can't. Not just because they won't, but they're just not capable of really giving help. And therefore God is saying, told you, I told you.
I gave you a king with my wrath, and I took him away with my fury. The iniquity of Ephraim is bound up. His sin is laid away. So you're definitely going to have to unravel the bound up parts. I kind of get that's like it's gone too far now to overlook. His sin is laid away. That's an odd choice of words.
Right. So the first thing we have to cover is 11, though, which is the idea of God gave them a king, even though he didn't think they needed a king. And this goes under the long-running debate of whether or not the Torah wants us to have a king or not. And this verse is used in the argument that says God didn't want us to have a king, we chose to have a king, and God wasn't terribly happy with that choice. And as he says in the book of Samuel, you're rejecting me by choosing to have a king. And now God is showing the result of that, which is you're not going to have a king anymore. Plus, this could also be a more specific reference to the history of the Northern Kingdom, which is that God had torn away the northern tribes from Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, because of his problems, if you will. And so basically it's like, I only gave you this kingdom because the guy in the south was so bad, and now you're doing even worse than he ever did, so I'm just going to take it back.
Okay.
So there's a couple different ways to look at that part of verse 11. Verse 12 lends itself to multiple interpretations as well. So one interpretation is the idea that the sins of Ephraim have been collecting, have been gathering. They are bundled, if you will, that God has been postponing and postponing and postponing any sort of punishment, or at least the full measure of punishment, because he was hoping for them to return and to repent. And that also was the idea of them being stored away. It's like God has cataloged and stored everything rather than dealing with it as it happened, in the hopes that he would be able to simply cancel it out and say it's forgiven. But unfortunately, the people never reached the point of actually seeking true forgiveness and of changing their ways. And so the accounts are coming due. It's just been sitting up in the rafters. It's not as though God didn't notice what they were doing and take stock. It's just the stock has been waiting, hoping that it wouldn't have to be used.
It's been sitting in the in tray.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Sitting in the in tray. But it's been cataloged. It's been bound. It's just hoped it wouldn't come to this.
Pangs of a woman in confinement shall come to him. He is an unwise son, for it is a time that he shall not stand in the birth stool of the children. I'm assuming, because we've got birth stool and pangs there, that the woman here is pregnant.
Yeah, we're talking about labor, yes.
Okay, and she's in labor and in confinement.
So the confinement, I'm not 100%. I mean, I can see where the translation is getting the term confinement from, but it's more like being encircled by the struggle of childbirth.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Bound in the throes of labor. I mean, you can say confined to the suffering of labor would also be another way of putting it. It just sounds a bit awkward to me in the English, but I see where they're drawing that translation from. And then of course and this is a bad time to be born, right? This is not the right opportunity, because it's just not going to work out right, because you're going through this horrible labor, and right now the short-term outlook is very, very bad. Long-term, yes, there's redemption and promise, but right now is not the time to be at the birth stool.
Now, the birth stool is the stool that the woman sits on to give birth?
Exactly. Long before it became the custom in Western countries to give birth while lying down, women in the ancient world, throughout Europe and most of the world, to the best of my knowledge, give birth while sitting.
I think they still do that in parts of Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a more natural posture. And especially if you don't have any medication which makes it easier to go through the pains of birth, it does usually make labor pass more quickly.
From the clutches of the grave I would ransom them. From death I would redeem them. I will be your words of death. I will decree the grave upon you. Remorse shall be hidden from my eyes. That's strong, isn't it?
Yeah, and also there's it's actually going to be part of our question, of going back to that question about the where is your king verse 10, right? Because there's actually been a running theme, verse 10, verse 7, and now this, with this he invocation that is a little ambiguous. So we struggled with it before, but it can mean more than just "I will be," which is the translation that you are reading. It can also be like a "where is," like a lamenting location cry. So it can be that I will be the word of death, and I will be the grave or the plague to them. But it could also be saying, that I will redeem them from death, because death, what power do you have over them, right? Sheol, what is your plague? And because revenge is far from my thoughts. So
you can read it quite easily, and it says from the clutches of the grave I would ransom them, from death I would redeem them. Like the option is there.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, definitely the first half of the verse, grammatically, the first half of the verse is very much that God is going to redeem them from Sheol and redeem them from death. And then the second half is where it gets confusing because of this odd construct of that I will be, or where is your word, death. And that's compounded because your plague, it's how, why is it I will be your, and is the your referring to Ephraim, or is the your referring to death itself? It is a very ambiguous verse.
Okay.
But the general thrust of this definitely seems to be that there is a promise of redemption here, definitely at the beginning half of the verse, and also at the very end.
And we are on the final verse now, verse 15.
Right.
For though he flourish among the marshes, for though he flourish among the marshes, I suppose it doesn't make sense like that. Okay. For though he flourish among the marshes, I should expect flourishes or flourished. Does this say the same one on yours? Am I missing?
No, for though he flourish among.
It's kind of a bit Shakespearean. For though he flourish among the marshes, okay. For though he flourish among the For though he flourish among the marshes, an east wind shall come, a wind of the Lord, ascending from the desert, and his spring shall dry up, and his fountain shall be parched. He shall plunder the treasure of all coveted vessels.
Yes, this is the desert wind, and one interpretation of this is that even if Ephraim is scattered among the marshes, meaning that they are flourishing in exile, that there will be a wind that will dry up that and will, strike them even there. And one way of reading the second half, or the very end of the verse rather, is to say that the wind itself is what will plunder the treasures, meaning that everything they thought they now had, even in this marshland, will be stripped from them by the wind.
Oh, I see. Okay. Just that last line, he shall plunder the treasure of all coveted vessels. Is there a specific, is that like just the stuff that they keep close to them, the treasures that they've amassed?
That's the usual translation of it that I've seen, yes.
Very good. Lovely. Wow, we flew through that. Chapter 14 will be a bit more upbeat, and
it definitely focuses much more on the promise that God is holding out to the people. Yes.
Lovely. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you guys at home for watching and keeping sitting next to me while I go on this journey through Hosea. I hope it's been useful for you. Thank you, Rabbi Neely, for giving us your time and expertise today.
Well, thanks for pulling it all together.
It's a pleasure. I'm enjoying this very much. And you guys, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Also, stick around because on your screen in a moment there'll be a nice button. You can click that. You'll subscribe to Rabbi Neely's channel. He has a ton of videos over there. He does them on lots of different subjects and 2 or 3 a week. So you won't run out of study options. And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.